Okay. Right, well, welcome. This is our session on universal basic income. Really delighted to be running this session today. It was with a bit of a prompt actually that we put the UBI session on. Thank you, Cleo. But actually it also came up as one of the topics when we ran our sessions at the end of June as part of our policy days and AGM, when we were talking about the economy more generally and whether we needed to relook at what the economy was for and reframe all of that. And UBI came up a couple of times in those sessions as some of our questions. So actually we know it's a topic that the sector is generally really interested in, and so we're delighted to be welcoming Cleo and Robin today to our session. So Cleo is joining us as co-founder of Basic Income Conversation, and for those of you who don't know Robin, he's director at Common Weal. Unfortunately, Jamie from the RSA has had to give his last-minute apologies. We will no doubt be roping him in on a webinar in the future. You don't get away that easily. With no further hold up from me, I was just going to hand straight over to Cleo to introduce UBI and start our session off today. So thanks, Cleo.
Oh, thank you for having me, and yeah, thank you for reacting to my prompt. I guess my background is in social enterprise. I've worked for the Melting Pot for the last 4 or 5 years, which is Scotland Centre for Social Innovation. We're a social enterprise. We work with a community of social innovators and social entrepreneurs. So I also do all this basic income stuff, and I don't know, it just seems like such a natural combination to me. It feels like a basic income would enormously benefit social innovation, the social enterprise sector, and people trying to make the world a better place because it enables them to do it. So that's why I prodded Social Enterprise Scotland to put this on. Yeah, so just in terms of what a basic income is, I think it's always important to start with the foundations of it. It is a simple concept, but actually as soon as you start trying to turn it into a reality, it becomes quite complicated. Basic income is essentially a tool. It can be used to do lots of different things based on how it's designed and why it's designed, who is advocating for it. It has some inherent characteristics, and fundamentally it's a payment that everyone receives regardless of their circumstances. So the 5 characteristics that are widely considered the fundamental ones are that it's paid in cash. So it's money that you can choose to spend on whatever you want. It's regular, weekly or monthly, preferably to something like an annual payment. It's paid to the individual, so everyone has their income that they can depend on. It's not paid to the household like a lot of benefits are. It's universal, so everyone gets it, literally everyone, and it's unconditional, so it's not means tested. You don't have to prove you're doing X, Y, Z to qualify for it. You don't have to be anything specific. You get it without any questions asked, essentially. Things like how much it's paid as, like the level of payment, how it's paid for in terms of the wider economy, that's all up for grabs. So there's a lot of variation that can happen with a basic income, and of course that impacts what it would do. It's been piloted in lots of different places around the world, but actually we don't have an example of a full basic income, so one that truly covers your basic needs, so you could live off of it if you really needed to. The closest we have is the Alaska Permanent Fund, so that is a permanent, essentially a basic income, although that is an annual payment. And when people talk about a basic income and the evidence around basic income, what they are referring to are pilots. So there have been lots and lots of pilots around the world, some lasting a long time, some quite short. The Finnish pilot is probably one that most of us have heard of recently, and that in fact wasn't a universal basic income, that was a basic income paid to a group of 2,000 unemployed people to see what the impact of giving them an unconditional income was. And the last few years, 4 local authorities in Scotland have been looking at the potential of a Scottish experiment, which is why it sort of felt like it's been within arm's reach for me the whole time I've been working on it, which is very motivating. And they published the final report of this big research project looking at the feasibility of a Scottish experiment in June. They recommended that pilots are a welcome next step and a desirable next step, but there are significant political barriers, which I'm sure we'll get into, I'm sure Robin will get into. But they have produced this beautiful report on piloting a basic income, which is a challenging thing to do because a basic income has certain characteristics that are very different from certain characteristics of an experiment. So for example, the universal aspect of a basic income is not something you can do within an experiment, because an experiment is decidedly something that you do with a small group of people in controlled circumstances. So that report is a really groundbreaking piece of work globally in terms of basic income. And it recommends two pilots. One that tests a high level of basic income that meets the Joseph Rowntree Foundation minimum income standard, so enough to live off of comfortably, which is about, varies slightly by age, but about £200 a week for that pilot. And then a low level, which is about £90 a week, which matches roughly subsistence level benefits in Scotland at the moment. So that tests what happens when you remove all of the conditions from the existing level of income supplement benefits, to see what that does for people. So the barriers to these experiments are largely political. They are largely to do with the institutions in control of benefits. The feasibility study made sure that they designed an experiment that would leave no one worse off for having participated in the experiment, which means that certain benefits need to be suspended, certain tax things need to happen, and there is currently no commitment from all of the levels of government, particularly central government, that have the controls over that at the moment, whilst the local authorities and Scottish Government are still very committed and very interested in piloting a basic income. We need buy-in from everyone that would be involved with it for the duration of the experiment, to ensure that it runs as it's supposed to, and that no detriment is experienced by people participating in those pilots. I mean, there is also a question about whether we should do a pilot, whether we should be dealing with small communities rather than rolling it out across Scotland. And I think that again comes from political will. And I mean, whilst I have a lot of respect, and I do really, I think the pilots that have been proposed would be incredibly valuable. And in terms of the size of the ask for a basic income, potentially pilots is the right level. But there is the potential we should just roll out a basic income across Scotland and use that as the pilot. The national pilot would give us very valuable information, and also hopefully some very valuable outcomes. So to talk a bit about the different types of things that a basic income can do, the outcomes that it can meet, these vary significantly based on the experimental design. So how much is paid, who is given it, how long the experiment is, and even things like how they collect the information about participants. Is it a survey of people, or what are you measuring? So you can only know something if you're measuring it effectively. So there will always be gaps in the evidence until we have a full basic income to refer to. Things like labour market participation. So quite often when you introduce someone to the concept of a basic income, they say, well, surely everyone will just sack off their jobs and sit at home and do nothing. And actually, the sort of most conclusive piece of evidence that we can garner from various different pilots is that actually that isn't the case. That people don't immediately quit their jobs, and there are varied impacts on labour market participation, but sort of we can relatively confidently infer that we wouldn't lose everyone from the labour market if we introduced basic income. There are short-term effects that you can see in pilots, so things like the immediate impact on poverty, on debt, on certain types of life choice. You can see within a 2-3 year pilot, but other things take a lot longer to occur. So things like educational impacts, health, and the community level effects. So the things that result because everyone in a community has had this change in their life and they're interacting differently. All of those things take a bit longer to show up. But those are kind of the things that are the most interesting, I think. So that's where I'm going to stop talking about pilots, because it's not the extent of a basic income, but it becomes a very big part of it when you talk about basic income, because that's the only examples that we have. But those are the real opportunities, I think, with basic income. And I think from our sort of current lived experience, from our current lives, from our current situations, we can all imagine what it would be like to not have to earn your living, to not have to earn your income, to have this enabler. And that's kind of what I'm getting at, is there's a choice to be made alongside a basic income. It's not just we have our basic income and all of these results are going to be inherent, they're absolutely going to follow. We have to make a choice about what kind of basic income we put in place and what outcomes we hope to see. And I think this is exactly where the experience of social entrepreneurs, where everyone involved in social enterprise comes in. how can we create a basic income that stimulates the things that we want to see, like social enterprise? What could a basic income do for the social enterprise sector? How could it most enable it? How we pay for a basic income is a significant part of that. Redistribution of wealth would address inequality as part of the implementation of a basic income, so through progressive income taxation. But we can also do other things with a basic income, like if we pay for it with a land value tax, for example, or a carbon tax, or a data tax, or a combination of all of these. These are things that we all have a stake in, so we should all benefit from the profits made from them. And the basic income is a tool for redistributing those profits to people and for enabling us as the population to do what we want with our time. So yeah, and then these sort of outcomes that we're chasing, these can also be met with phased implementation. So a basic income, starting with a basic income for willfully underpaid forms of work. So things like artists. I know the latest Common Weal proposal was a basic income for artists. For carers, our economy, our country, our lives all depend on unpaid care for children, for people with disabilities, for older people, and I think a basic income for carers would be something that would make a massive difference to people's lives and people who are providing an absolutely essential form of work currently for no pay. For entrepreneurs, of course, particularly for social entrepreneurs, because the amount of money in social change-based projects is quite low. A basic income for social entrepreneurs would make a massive difference to people and to the types of businesses that result from people's work. So personally, I think the most important aim of a basic income should be eliminating poverty. I think that's a big opportunity, and a basic income designed in the right way, if we do it properly, I believe we could do that with a basic income. But then I think my second priority, or my second thing that I find most interesting about the opportunity of a basic income, is changing the way that we view and that we go about work. So we're very used to seeing to this idea that time, income, and work are inextricably linked, that those things just come together. But they actually don't have to be. If our income was guaranteed, we could use our time and our work in whatever way we saw fit. And we're currently very far from that being the case. Even if in this classic third sector style, you balance a lot of different types of work, and one job funds your other jobs, or as a social enterprise, one service funds your other services. Those are very innovative and very important, and still would be part of the way that we run the country or society, however you want to look at it. But a basic income would build in a foundation that all of that would stand on. So no one would ever fall below that. If something went wrong, if you had a dip in your profits, you would always have your basic income to depend on. And then the other thing is there's a lot of work that needs to be done around the environment, around the way that we treat each other, around social progress, mental health, all of these things. This work needs to be done, and currently those types of work are very undervalued. The funding is not there, the money is not there to make sure all of that work is being done, that it's being done well. And social enterprise, again, knows that. That's, to me, I think social enterprise comes from seeing problems in the world, wanting to solve them, and seeing an effective business model as a way of funding a solution to those problems. And again, I think basic income can be another string to that bow. It can be another part of how we enable that social change to happen alongside social enterprise. So how I see a basic income as interacting with social enterprises is pretty complex. But the overview, or the headlines, I think, are kind of twofold. So it's around these choices around work, allowing people to make the choice to work for a social enterprise, choosing work that's fulfilling and meaningful over profitable or high pay, because making a social contribution is important to all of us, but also individually. So I think it's also a fund for people that are already working on social enterprise. It allows us to continue to do it through all those peaks and troughs. We know the graph that it takes to fund the work that we're doing, and I think an injection of unconditional money into the sector would be completely transformative. And then the other side of it, to me, is about well-being. I think particularly during the startup stage, we see we see burnout, or for, to use a more brutal term, like serious mental health repercussions of committing to the type of work that we want to do and that we see needs to be done, just as part of the process of starting up a business, but particularly a social business. And that shouldn't be the case. I think we demonstrate the value of our work every day, we measure it, we show the impact, and a basic income is an opportunity to put our money where our mouth is, essentially. Like, this is the work that needs to be done, we're already doing it, but this is a way to actually enable that happening on a larger scale, and to scale up, essentially, that type of work. So that's initially what I wanted to say. I'm excited to hear questions, and Robin.
Thank you, Cleo. There's already questions starting to come in, and what we're going to do is put all of those through at the end, and I've been making a few notes myself. So thank you for that introduction in terms of UBI. I'm going to hand straight over to Robin, and then we're going to come to Q&A at the end. So do start thinking through those questions. I would say concentrate also on what Robin has to say, but I don't think he'll give you any choice to do anything other. So over to you, Robin.
Okay, thanks for the invitation, folks. Lovely to talk to you all about this. I'm just to say, Naomi, please. I was going to be a tight 10 minutes, and then because Jamie's not been able to do it, he's had a little personal emergency. I'm going to talk about a few more things than I planned to, but please stop me if I go on for too long, because this is an issue about which I have thought much for many years. So let me just start with where we were with this. I first explicitly advocated a universal basic income in 2013 during the Scottish independence referendum, when we were doing some work on what could Scotland do independent. And I'll be honest, at that point, I would have described myself as about 60% the way with universal basic income. It is not magic. It is not a single solution. It doesn't fix everything. And I always get nervous when people think, oh, we've found one magic solution that'll fix it all. And that was my hesitation. And then over time, I think that rose up to about 75% convinced. Still some reservations, still some worries, but I became increasingly of the view that, well, nobody's got anything else that's compelling for where we go next. And then I think with the virus, I'm probably at 90% now, for a number of reasons. But I do also want to talk about the 10% of me that's still not quite 100% there, and I'll explain why. So, what is it that fuels the 90% of me that thinks this is a good idea? I almost feel like I'll just jump over the social justice element of it. Massive inequality. We have an economy which is increasingly geared up to wealth extraction. We can see that if you own Amazon, you do really well, and if you don't know it, if you work for Amazon, you don't do really well. And these patterns are exacerbating. So there's a straightforward social justice thing. And the benefit system in Britain is a dystopian hellhole which treats people in an inhumane way for no reason other than ideology. And we need to do something about that. It's a rabbit hole of different allowances, and it's really difficult to navigate and work. But I think the justice stuff's fairly straightforward. I think everybody gets the idea that if you take people out of poverty and you give them a consistent income, you're dealing with justice issues. I want to add to that one other though, and it was Cleo picked up the mental health point. One of the aspects of a UBI which is really important for me is that as well as justice, we have mental health. So we have an economy which is almost explicitly designed around the coercion into employment because of the threat of starvation. So if you look, a lot of capitalist theory is, it's not that people can sell their labour, it's people don't have any option. You've got to. So you have to be able to do this. Now, this becomes a major problem when people have illnesses or unemployment, or where they can't get work, or where the work they can get is insecure. And so what we've done is we've created a system with anxiety driving people towards the need to work, but an economy which is not delivering the opportunities for them to work in the ways that they are able to. And anxiety, I talk sometimes to Consumer Advice Scotland, and the anxiety that people feel from this is absolutely intense. The fear of losing a house, the fear of being able to feed your family. So forget justice. Do we want to live in a society which inflicts, I'd say at least 30% of the population, probably more, live in a state of constant anxiety about income? That's wrong. We need to do something about that. People shouldn't live like that in an environment of plenty. But I think the one that I pushed most was to say we've got to stop seeing this as being a fix for something that's wrong, as opposed to an opportunity for something that can be better. And I mean, I speak to a lot of social enterprises, a lot of small businesses. I just came off a call with a small business before coming on to this. And it's always the same. Scaling up, moving into a new product line, pivoting to something new, setting up in the first place. Now that's a matter of deep anxiety for people because the risk of failure is so high, and the consequences and implications if you do fail are really major. Particularly, especially if you come from a middle class background, you kind of expect to have a nice house, you'll be able to feed your family. The risk, the gap, the jump to go and start an enterprise, to leave employment and go and do things like this is enormous. And I know my dad was a small business startup manager. I saw it, as a kid. I saw people coming in wanting to start businesses, and it was very literally their house on the line, their entire life on the line. There must be some way that we can create a supported space which enable people to be genuinely entrepreneurial. Genuinely, not I've got some money, I'm going to buy 5 properties and rent them out. I mean, genuinely entrepreneurial, without the sense that at all times they're in a tightrope and underneath it's only alligators. So we've got to see this as being a real opportunity. But I'm going to pick one more, and this is the one which moved me from 60 to 75 or 80. And it's a bit technical, but I do want to just put it into your heads because it's really important as well. We assume that broadly that the main means of redistributing wealth in society is tax. So tax and spend is how we redistribute wealth. That's not really true. By far, the major means of redistributing wealth in society is wages. It is wages which move money by far from large business, capital, banks, whatever, into people's bank accounts, which they can spend. But automation is threatening this in a way that I still don't think a lot of people have fully appreciated. You can automate mid-level lawyer legal jobs completely now. You can, jobs that people didn't think could be automated. So the one that they always say is you can't automate creativity. You can. If you create some basic algorithms, you can now create entire environments in computer games based on an algorithm. Design one tree, you can do all sorts of things. Creative jobs are going. And ironically, the jobs which aren't going are the ones which we consider low skill, care. Robots are really good at thinking and really bad at picking things up, really bad at, adjusting things, fixing things, tucking somebody in. And there's this real risk that the jobs which redistribute wealth around the economy are in decline, and the ones that don't, that give you that barely subsistence lifestyle, they're the ones that remain, which would be this would be a major, major crisis for Western economies if the wage mechanism for redistributing wealth really goes into decline and we don't come up with a response to it. And universal basic income is a response to it. So these are 4 reasons why I think we need to think very, very seriously about it. So is it magic? No, it is not. This is where we've really got to be clear, is that if you implement a UBI, a basic income, in the wrong way, it will be full-blown, absolute dystopia. It will be terrible. You will keep people trapped in a system where there's an assumption of subsistence. There's an assumption that people are okay because they've got their basic income. Therefore, all the other things, an economy that gives them jobs, a society that gives them opportunities, become not an issue, not a problem. And you start to see a basic income as simply a way of redistributing money through people back into corporations to keep the economy going. This would be potentially really alarming. Some of the kind of extreme views of the Silicon Valley set are really asking themselves, how do they keep buying our stuff if we stop creating jobs for them? We automate their jobs out of life. How do we sell the things that we are making through automation? And their conclusion is, well, if we just take money, give it to them, they can give it all straight back to us. That is a problem. If you've got a universal basic income, the purpose of which is to prop up excessively high housing prices in a bad housing market. So you see it as being a solution to overpriced housing. Then again, all you're doing is you're reinforcing the system. I'm going to cry if the Scottish Government does another right to buy scheme. We know what this does. It only keeps moving housing prices up. It makes it higher, harder and harder for people to buy. So we've got to look at this. If we change something as substantial as this without looking at the social infrastructure, what do we do with our extra day off or our time off? Are we, we've moved more and more to a consumption world. There is an assumption that on the days we don't work, we spend. So we're in a shopping mall or we can't. If we've got more time off, and please God, can we have more time off? If we've got more time off, we can't just do more of what we're doing. What is society offering? What are the things that we do and value in there? And culture is crucial. Our cultural sense of this. I'm a generation of Scots that values work inherently as a moral thing. I was that generation where you work because it's good for you. I still believe that. I do think work's a good thing. I think it's good for all of us to do something productive and constructive. But what happens when we get into a world where there may not just be the volumes of work? How do we view people that don't work? When I grew up, soft hands meant that you were an office boy, so you weren't properly working. But what happens when this becomes a thing which a lot of people have direct experience of, is life without work? We don't know how to address these things. So, is it a utopia? Is it a dystopia? It's neither. Once again, this is the problem with the dumb human implication that everything can be boiled down to an A or a B. The difference between a utopian or a dystopian implementation of this is whether we see it as a tack on to a failing economy or an emergency response to a crisis, or whether we say, no, we're making a fundamental choice about what we're doing with our society. We want to work a bit less. We want to have more creativity and allow that to stimulate more things. We want to build our societies more around this kind of understanding of work and labour. And we want to make sure that the other elements of society, housing, public services, transport, enable this vision of what we're doing next. So just lobbing it on the top of what we already do, I've got to say that I think probably in balance that will go dystopia. And then, as always, democracy will kick back in and there'll be riots and unhappiness about the dystopia and it'll be adapted and it'll get a bit better and so on. It'd be much better if we just got it right the first time. So these are the key things. Where are we in Scotland? Now this, I don't want to be too negative, but at the same time, I don't want to actually be positive. I'm on the stakeholder group, or I was in the stakeholder group that was looking into these pilots. At the first meeting, most people said, this is kind of futile. There's not the powers to do it in Scotland. And then we spent 2 years to discover that there's not the powers to do it in Scotland. So it can't be done in Scotland. You can't do it. The only way that we've got, you would need complete control of the benefit system, complete control of the tax system, and you'd need to have a real spine, and Westminster would need to let you. Or alternatively, they would need to agree to do it from Westminster separately for Scotland. You would also, the whole tax system, every version of UBI assumes that you're removing, all the ones that I think work, assume that you're removing a lot of thresholds on tax exemptions. So you get taxed on your first penny of income, but you get a lot of that money back. You can't do that in Scotland. It's not doable. We can't do it. And then we come to the question of pilot. Now, again, there was a number of us at the first meeting. I'm a skeptic. There's some pilots are great for making people think that you're doing something. Are very, very different than actually doing something. My personal view is that all the academic learning that we can gain from pilots has been gained. Doing another one will show us the same things that we've seen from other pilots. Because the stuff we don't know is what they call in social science agglomeration effects. We know more or less what happens when you say to somebody, I'm going to give you some money. You could work less, you can invest it in something, you could do more, you could whatever. We know roughly what their behaviour is. What we don't really know is what happens if you take an entire town of people and you give everybody a bit more time and a bit more security. And you tell them this is long term. How do they change their lives? How do they interact? Do they self-organise care more? Do they spontaneously create social events? I come from a small town, we have our gala day. Does gala day become something that you organise more often because we've got more time, because we've got this time to fill? Do we go into a consumption mode? Do we build more facilities so that we spend more time doing this? We don't know. These aren't things you can tell by giving a random selection of people some money for a period of time, especially when they know it's going to be withdrawn at the end of the pilot. And the way that I phrase this is fairly straightforward. If you had piloted the NHS, it probably wouldn't have worked. So if you were to say, we're fancying NHS, what we're going to do is we're going to give 6 people healthcare and watch what happens. You wouldn't have been able to model the NHS. The NHS doesn't work like that. You've got, sometimes in life, you have just got to say, we're going to do this because it's right, because it's time to do it, because we believe it, or even just be honest and say, we're going to do this because we're not sure it's right, but we think it is, and it's our best hope. We're going to take a punt, and if it doesn't work, we'll learn from it, but please come with us as we take this punt. So spare me from pilots and tell me when we're going to start looking at not just a vision for how we can test this, but a vision for how we can embed this into Scotland in the utopian rather than dystopian model. So you tell me in policy, in thinking, how do we relate to housing? How do we relate to social services? How do we relate to economic policy? How do we relate to consumption? How do we relate to the environmental crises? That's what I would like to see. So, you know, magic, okay, great, we've got a brilliant, it's effectively an academic theoretical proposal for a pilot. What we don't have is a vision for the Scotland. No, we don't even have a full discussion about the Scotland that we would be getting to. And I think I'm feeling right now, it's the summer, it always does this, I'm feeling right now that we're unlearning a lot of stuff that we learned in early virus. So everyone was saying we need to look at the future again. We need to start to talk about the future again because things are changing. And I fear that right now where we've all got to is we've reverted back to the, oh God, could we not just fix everything as it was? No, we can't. It won't happen. I think there's total denial about what's coming next. And I think what's coming next will jump us, stimulate us towards one version of this, a utopian or dystopian version of something, the way it's going. But it's, at the moment, we're stumbling into it. We're almost waiting to see what happens next, rather than taking some control of a vision of what we want to do. So we've got an economic recovery framework. We don't, but as far as there is one, it's not considering universal basic income as any component of it. So we're not linking these ideas up, and we're not building them well. So what do I think we need to do? Well, first of all, I mean, we could just stop talking about this until somebody explains how we can do it. People will know I support Scottish independence. It's one of the first things I would do if it was Scottish independence. I'd have a full commission for how to implement this, not how to implement a parliament, how to implement it. Maybe even put it to a referendum. Maybe even say to people, this is a big, big change in Scotland and how we exist. We want to put this, it's a punt, it's a risk, nobody else has done this. We want to put it to you. Is this a risk you want to take? So that's how I would do it. But until we've got an implementation model, there's nothing much more to talk about. That's what's so sad about it. So what we can talk about is, once we implement it, how does it relate to all the other stuff that we want to do? How does it relate to the kind of economy, the kind of society, and the kind of culture and world that we want to build? That discussion we can have just now. But that would require Scotland to have a big, major national conversation about the future. And I'm feeling a little pessimistic. Again, it's the summer, it always picks up again after summer. But I'm feeling a little pessimistic at the moment. I'm struggling to see any substantial economic debate about what we're doing next in Scotland. So far, we have had the usual lobbyists asking for the usual things, some of it entirely justified, some of it chancing their arm, but you know, so far so normal. We've published lots of policy work, and there's some others that have published some policy work on what you could do. We've got the Economic Recovery Group report, and I'm not super taken with it. I think it's very difficult to see what the hell they're actually proposing in it. And these were all published, and then it just went. And instead, what we've got is Duncan Bannatyne threatening to close all these gyms. Boo-hoo. And that's what we're talking about just now. So my big pitch here is we need to talk about this. The world is changing. It's changing in phenomenal ways. And Scotland can't have this tiny wee mindset that we have when we address these problems, which is sit around, wait and see what someone else does and copy it. Or we've got to have this conversation. And we've got to find a way to have this conversation. My firm, sincere belief is that social enterprise, SMEs, community enterprises, mutual and cooperatives are an essential part of the economy that we have to build, and that they are inherently and essentially linked to a system which would, for me, include universal basic income as a means of facilitating all that stuff. This is the conversation I think that we need to have in Scotland. So, great. if they do a pilot, they do a pilot. Spend a lot of money. Academics will look over it in our 3 years. What I'd really like to see is us saying, right, what's the bloody vision and what's the point, and how does this relate to the future we want to build? And then from that, we will understand the kind of universal basic income that we need for Scotland.
Thank you. There's a lot. I have to say I've got lots of questions. There's quite a few come in, and I've got quite a few on my notepad just in front of me. Stimulates quite a lot of debate. I'm going to come in, and thanks Cleo for joining us back for the questions. I guess I'm going to pick up. I come from a kind of waste and recycling background where we did a lot of campaigning to try and actually get any recycling happening at one point. So I come from that kind of sense, and I wanted to pick up, it's perhaps unfair, a bit of a phrase of, is the campaign for UBI to some degree a little bit about chancing our arm, because we know we need some change and we're almost proposing something that's seen as very radical so that we end up at least with a middle ground that's a bit more sensible than where we are now. Does that make sense as a question?
Yeah.
And Robin, just I'll start with you and then bring Cleo in.
Right, so the answer to that is no. Nobody's got a middle ground with UBI. So it's either universal and an income or it's not. So you can have a shit UBI or you can have a good UBI, but it's still a UBI. Nobody that I know that's involved in this is seeing this as a lever in to reforming universal credit. So that's not how this is being conceived. But again, there is quite a big split between people who are looking at this technically, who will tell you, well, there's only so much we can talk about. I mean, forget middle ground. In Scotland, there's no base ground and there's no top ground. We have no ground. This is not an area we have power over. So what we're really talking about here is not the recycling example where there's something that we should be doing and can be doing. There's plenty of that. Invite me back. I'll talk for an hour. There's plenty that we should be doing and can be doing and aren't doing. Universal basic income is something we can't do, but it is a methodology, an important part of a methodology for asking a much more fundamental question about what we do next. So if to give you an analogy, rather than it being like where recycling was 15 years ago, it's much more like where the circular economy was 5 years ago. It wasn't about to happen, but it was an essential conversation that was taking place to refocus our minds on the debate about what does need to happen. And, I hope, like the circular economy stuff, we get to the point where most people start to say, actually, 5 years ago, this was a conversation and now it's an imperative. And that's what I hope happens.
Thank you, Robin. Cleo, just any perspectives from you? I guess the point that it's universal, I guess, is the key one.
Yeah, I think there's, like Robin's totally right, it's a binary. We either have a universal basic income or we have other stuff that's not a universal basic income. So, but a lot of things are being branded by the media and misinterpreted on a big scale as a basic income now. It's become enough of a concept that people know what it is, but there's not a big enough understanding of what it actually is for people to be able to look at what's being called a basic income and work out whether it is or not. For example, Spain put a basic income in place in response to the crisis. They didn't. It wasn't a basic income in a lot of different ways. So I think when you're living in the country, you'll know whether you're getting your universal basic income or not. But I do think it's important that we understand what it is and that we stick to those morals and stick to the good version rather than the bad version partly. I get what you're saying though. Like, I do feel I'm an idealist, so I talk about things like basic income for a living, but I also measure social impact in my other job. So when I think about what the immediate social impact of my work is, I think there's something about this basic income being the yardstick that other social security reforms are being measured against. We won't give you a basic income, but we'll give you a better reform to universal credit than if you were spending all your time asking for a reform to universal credit, potentially.
Okay. It's just an interesting perspective. I just wanted to get a sense of that. And just another thing that I guess strikes me is, again, it's often put out as a real thing of looking at addressing inequality. And I guess maybe this is a skeptical question, but if suddenly everyone had a universal basic income that actually pushed everyone's basic income up, would prices not rise and would we just still not end up with a system of inequality?
Oh, sorry, let's not get carried away here. It doesn't end inequality. A UBI would compress, on its own with nothing else done, what UBI would do is compress one end of the inequality scale. So what you'd basically do is you would take the people who fall under reasonable subsistence and you would squeeze them up into basic subsistence. It doesn't take, in itself, with just that, it doesn't take any money away from Jeff Bezos or Amazon. It's not doing anything to take the whole inequality spectrum and flatten it. This is exactly what I mean. You need an economy policy for that. You need a social policy, a culture. You can't just, it's this, I get so frustrated. People want magic solutions. There's none. It's complicated. It's complicated. So what this does is it unlocks a bunch of the problems that come at the bottom. So yes, the poverty, and yes, the insecurity and anxiety, but also yes, like I say, the risk factor in going from work to set up a business or in making the decision to have a child. It takes the risk factor out. But I mean, the whole dystopian version of it is that basically we create two classes. There's an ownership class and there's a basic income class. That's worse inequality. So you've got the billionaires and the subsistence people. Now, the reason why they get very concerned about this, and I'm quite serious, I don't know if you've ever seen that some of the billionaires have actually had people over talking about how to control the basic income class, shock collars. Because when you've got 6 billionaires to 1 million people on subsistence, and you've lost a lot of that middle ground, those, like I was saying, those lawyers who used to have a good life doing things that Google have now automated, and they're suddenly depressed down into the basic income. I mean, that's a major social crisis that's coming. So this is what I'm saying again. If you then say this is a brilliant way to address the appalling failure at the bottom of the inequality spectrum, and then stop and don't overclaim what it does for the rest, then that's brilliant. And then we can start to talk about the rest of it and how you integrate it into that system.
Thank you. I just thought it was an important point to get over because I think certainly it's often aligned, I think, with that equalities debate, and I just wanted to get a perspective on that. So, Cleo, I was wondering if I could come back to you just about a point about, I guess, entrepreneurship and that sense of, I know when we had our new economy session, there was a sense of, I think one of our panellists said actually, from a personal perspective, they had support in general for the UBI principle, but it almost had to sit with that social contract around it. So that sense of what else is it that we're trying to do. And I think, I guess, and I look, having worked in the entrepreneur side of the spectrum as well, people starting enterprises isn't always just about that financial thing. So again, I always think, what is it that's really important about, for me, it's opportunity. So what do people need that's not just money, but is much broader about opportunity if we really want people to realise what I think we often put on as the hopes of what UBI could help create in terms of more entrepreneurialism. What else do you think people need in that kind of social contract arena to make that happen?
I think it's about building secure risk into everything that people do. I think secure risk for innovation, for entrepreneurship, you need to be able to take risks and you need to be safe to do so. And currently you're not. Like we try and fix and we try and stimulate an entrepreneurial culture through support, and like, no disrespect, I work in it and like it's fantastic and it does make an enormous difference to people's journey, their chances of success. But already by the time they get to that point where they're accessing support, you've eliminated swathes of people who would just never do it based on their gender, their class, their experience, like their mental health, all of that stuff. Like, certain people are just, they don't have access to being able to take secure risks, even in, the small startup, like the little tiny flame of an idea being taken into action. And I think that's where you need to make an actual investment. You need to put money into it, because we do function in an economy, like we do function in a society where you need money to be able to make certain choices. And that's the bit that basic income feeds. So you completely need all of the support around. But I think at the moment, to kind of flip the question, it's like we're trying to stimulate entrepreneurship with support, but actually we need to stimulate entrepreneurship with entrepreneurial support. We need to stimulate it with like living your life support in a better way, which we're currently not doing.
Thank you, Cleo. I'm just looking at the questions that have come in through the chat as well. And one person's kind of talking about, obviously, the community wealth building approach that I think we're starting to see coming through, particularly, I guess, North Ayrshire. We had them speaking about community wealth building on one of our webinars the other week. What hope do you hold out in terms of what community wealth building might bring? Is it complementary to UBI? Is there a way that they should fit together? Or will it achieve some of what we're hopeful to do for communities in the way it exists at the moment?
Well, I mean, just to be clear about this, I have been rattling on about community wealth building from the beginning. This is the whole purpose of the theories about what Common Weal is. You can phone you when you're not supposed to. This is the whole theory. This is a large part of the theory about what Common Weal is. What we are saying is if you distribute economic activity more evenly across a wider number of economic players, you get better innovation, you get better economic outcomes, you get less wealth extraction and get more reinvestment. I mean, I find community wealth building really useful as a term, but it's basically just German Mittelstand capitalism. It's basically just saying, rather than everything getting made in China by one giant corporation and sold through an endless relay of corporate front ends, and your best hope is to get so, it's actually about saying, well, no, we can make more of this stuff here, we could do more of this stuff, we could try this stuff, we've got to even the playing field. And I will say this again and again, it was the colleges had beforehand. One of the most common conversations that I have is with the business sector, who are constantly saying all the time, it's not an even playing field, we can't compete. So you all know this. I mean, I'm preaching to the converted here. You know this. If you want to sell one sausage to one school, you have to fill in the same 36 pages of paperwork as if you want to sell every sausage to every school. It's rigged against the small player. And of course it's rigged against the small player because you don't have the offence Social Enterprise Scotland, you don't have the money for lobbyists. Their lobbyists are there every day, every single day. They can second people into the department that does public procurement. I can go on about this for ages. I'm going to say it's positive corruption. I just, it's not in the public interest, this. And nothing ever changes with it. So when I said the basic income deals with the bottom, yeah, the principles of community wealth building, which is just to say post-war a kind of post-war social democratic, particularly Germanic capitalism, which is focused much more on a lot of smaller players making things, it's crucial. And going back to one of the things that the more that I've read about this, the more I can't stand by. So I just said no more now. I'm not doing it. It costs us a bit more just now, but we buy everything from small local shops. We get our fruit from the fruit shop, we get our meat from the butchers, we get our milk from Moss Gill, because they give it in glass bottles. We love Moss Gill. We do all the right stuff. The only things we go to the co-op for, which is our local supermarket, is anything we can't get through the other stuff, because I know it works. It's more pleasant. How the hell do you people in cities get your gossip if you shop in supermarkets? It's community, it's wealth. But I want to come back to the crucial point that you were making. Is it just about money? No. Remember I was talking about my generation inherently believing in the power of work. Well, I'm also a sociologist, and I know that the power of work has been measured psychologically and socially again and again. We all want to feel we contribute to society, that we do something. And for those that don't know, do you know the add an egg thing? So in the 50s, when they started doing ready meals, they could do an entire baked cake in one packet, and all you had to do was add water and chuck it in the oven, and it never sold. Nobody would touch it. And they went and did research as to why, and it was because everyone felt guilty because it was just too damned easy. So what they did was they took the powdered egg in and they advertised, just add an egg. And by saying just add an egg, suddenly everyone felt a buy-in and a commitment, and they sold like hotcakes. And that was why for about 20 years, 25 years, all ready mix had add an egg. And it speaks to the human desire to be useful, to do something. And we think we get all our pleasure from lying about drinking and watching Netflix, but we don't, not even close. You do it for long enough and say, what is the point of my life? And one of the best things about this terrible tragedy of COVID, one of the best things is the number of conversations I've had with people who've said, what the hell am I doing with my life? Why am I doing this thing? Why am I not doing something that I'm proud of, that I feel is more useful? And so this idea of community wealth building, it's actually a rather lazy way of saying, or a convenient way of saying, no, let's rip up this globalized corporate model and let's replace it with a much more balanced model, which has impacts and benefits right across the spectrum, from our psychological well-being of feeling there's a point to our existence. I'm here for something. I'm not just a consumption machine like some cow. I'm not just a herbivore. I've got some role in the world here, all the way up to, and it creates much more virtuous economic outcomes for everybody concerned. There's much less environmental damage, and it gives you a much more resilient and sustainable future. That's why we called our proposal Resilient Scotland. So sorry if I've got way agitated about this. I spent the first 6 months of this year with a big team working relentlessly on an extensive programme for how you take community wealth building and you replace our current economic model with that. We've done it in detail, it's all there. And when earlier on I was saying that I'm frustrated that the economic debate seems to have just disappeared at the moment, is precisely because 1 minute everyone's saying, actually, we do need to look at resilience, we do need to look at manufacturing capacity, we do need to look at the proportion of Scotland's economy which is domestically owned, is probably the lowest in the entire developed world. We've almost certainly got the most foreign-owned economy anywhere in the planet in a developed country, and we're not talking about it. So community wealth building is damn near my church now. It's the closest to a place that I pray is to the idea that we can create that as the economic model that fuels Scotland.
I'm only thinking, if only that wasn't a pilot as well, eh?
Oh, see, I'm going to see if I hear another pilot or I hear another umbrella of existing organisations as a solution to the problem, I am going to put a pen through my eye. It's the plague of Scotland. The plague of Scotland is, how can we look like we're doing something, not how can we do something.
Yeah, and I think this is where community wealth building comes with a basic income. Like, if you can build enough wealth within a community to fund a basic income for that community, then you can, it's not a pilot, it's a small scale basic income, universal within an area. And I think it's great to hear you talk in so much detail about community wealth building and that as a model. And I think also the other crucial part of this is building power. Like, the more pockets of community wealth that we have, with people using it to fund and implement policies within a community, the more examples we have of it working and the more inspiration we have for other people doing the exact same thing. And like you say, it's a big ask to ask government to implement a basic income. And I saw someone in the chat saying, why would the people that put the policies in place, who are the wealthy themselves, why would they use that to redistribute their own wealth? There is a serious question about that. So really, we need to do something alongside that. We need to start building power into our own economic system and our vision for a new economic system, which I think should be built around a basic income. And to do that, you have to build assets and you have to build power, and that's what social enterprise is about, right? As well, like, you're building income to do what you want to do out with the sort of normal prescription of how a business should operate. And that's what I think community wealth building, the connection with basic income is. We could do it. We could actually just get on with it and do it without waiting for other people to do it for us.
Thanks, Cleo. I'm slightly conscious of time, given we've got 3 minutes left, which has gone, the whole hour's gone so fast. The thought, I guess, I'm left with in my head is, and I'd be prepared to be shot down on this, it usually happens, but it's a thought that almost is like, is universal basic income the right word, or is it about universal basic opportunity? And that's the kind of bit that I kind of sit there and go away with. And I guess we need to keep the income bit there because it needs to reflect the finance side, as the points that I guess you've made, Cleo, about making sure that we can de-risk things for people. But, you know, I'm very much about how do we create a real sense of true equal opportunity.
Yeah, I think that's true, but I think that's the goal, right? That's the thing that we're uniting behind. Like, basic income is a tool for that. Like, it wouldn't provide universal basic opportunity, like, but it could be part of our toolkit of policies that we're putting in place. And I guess that this is exactly what the resilient economy stuff that Common Weal have put together. It's a plan for doing that. And I think we need to talk about basic income because it changes the way that we think about income, about work. It's a big goal that we can work towards, and a very big specific goal that we can work towards. But it's nowhere near as big as universal basic opportunity. It's just one part of that.
And this is really important. One of my big interests is cognitive psychology, because if you want to make things happen in society, you've got to understand how people feel about them, which is why I keep crying every time environmentalists say, oh, we need to sacrifice. No, we don't. There's ways that we can give people what they want from their lives that don't damage the environment. It's not all about sacrifice. Actually, what it is about, the key thing is, basically there's 3 or 4 things that drive human well-being outside of health. Sufficiency, I have enough to live a decent life. Security, I believe I will have enough to live a decent life in the future, so I'm not scared. Opportunity, where I am now doesn't have to be precisely where I will always be. I mean, there's a bunch more, but the other really crucial one is respect. I have value in my community. I am respected because I have a contribution that I make that others value. Security, sufficiency, security, opportunity, and respect. With these things, you have a phenomenal foundation for a really strong society. And this is what we're trying to introduce. This is what we're trying to suggest is, what's really frustrating about it is, it's not so much that there are no roads, it's that they're all got barriers over them. So what we can do is we can take the barriers down. It's one of those cases where we don't have, it's not only about inventing new stuff. I mean, seriously, just take the public procurement policy and fix it. It's crazy. There's no reason to not do it, except for the lobbyists. So that's one thing I want to say, but there's the last one sentence that I wanted to, or 1 minute, that I wanted to add, because you've asked it and it's popped up in a couple of the questions I saw, and we never completely addressed it, which is how to pay for it. And this is, one more time, everybody looking at the problem the wrong way around, which is to say, in a circumstance of massive inequality, which is extremely tax inefficient, how do we raise tax? Right, well, you don't. So we did this a few years ago. We modelled, if you took the Scottish economy, right, and you reprofiled it so it doesn't grow and tax doesn't rise. So the same tax rates with the same national GDP, the same national wealth, but you distributed salaries as flat and as even as they do in the Nordic countries, tax efficiency in itself raises about 6 billion additional pounds of income without putting tax rates up, right? So what you're saying is, it's one of those things whereby there's a massive hole in the bottom of our ship. How can we plug it with biscuits? You don't. The problem's the hole in the ship. We've got to get the hole in the ship fixed. And the hole in the ship is an economy which doesn't distribute opportunity. That's exactly the point. You get what you're given. You can't easily make something different off it. And what you're given has been getting less and less and less. How do we do this? It's very straightforward. You can do it at a national level, you can do it at a local level, and it's the same thing. If you are buying your bread from the baker and you're a joiner, when that local baker gets a broken window, he comes to you or she comes to you to get her window fixed. If you then buy from the butcher and you need to get, the butcher needs a new cabinet put in, they come to you. Your wealth now means you can afford to shop in the butchers and the bakers, even though it's 10% more expensive. And so on, and so on, and so on. You do this for a period of time at a local and a national level, and it turns out the inequality that you assume is the problem isn't there anymore. And then you can just stop fretting about it. You can just lob up some very sensible, moderate taxes on a large number of people who are no longer constantly on the threshold of insecurity, and it just pays for it. So let's not worry about this, who pays for it. That is a specific framing by the hard right. Who's going to pay for it? Aye, the same as you do. As soon as you need to, you find the money. It falls out the sky when you want to do it. It's a structural problem. The financing of basic income is a structural problem. So yes, if we don't have another means to do it, let's do a windfall tax on big corporations for a period of time while we follow the economic plan, which will enable the opportunity to mean that we eat better bread and better sausages and warmer homes, and we did it ourselves, And in doing it, we created the wealth which enabled us to do the next thing. And round in a virtuous circle, all underpinned by a universal basic income, which says to you, we are a society that wants you to feel confident in taking a risk in doing something better than we are currently doing. Now, that shouldn't be radical. And the fact that it is shows you why it's so important that we get on with this now.
Thank you. I'm looking through the questions to see anything else that I've missed, while conscious that it's my fault because I'm meant to have a 12:30 meeting. So I'm looking at my clock thinking, oh, goodness me. The joys of being the host and having other appointments booked in your diary. There's a few questions that have come through, and what I think I might do is I've told people to email me if they've got anything in terms of the basic reports that have come through. I suspect this will be a topic that we end up coming back to at some point. It's the ways we're looking at the economy. We ran some early sessions looking at the economic recovery response. I think we'll be coming back to this in a future session from a broader perspective, and I think we can pick up on lots of that there. There's a few questions, Cleo, about kind of defining, what do we mean by carers? How would we define artists? So there's definitely those kind of detailed questions that people are really keen to understand. And I feel terrible for having to almost cut the conversation short just because I've got this crazy diary. More time.
Can I say one last thing now?
Yes, I was going to say I was just going to leave it for you both to make a final comment and thank you both. So yeah, crack on, Cleo.
I saw someone's question about what key actions can you make as a social enterprise to progress this, and I think comes back to Robin's point about we should be having this conversation as a country, and we should be framing the conversation around the vision for the country, not about the specific details of something that we can do immediately. And that's exactly why my organisation is called Basic Income Conversation, because it's about having these conversations in meaningful places. So that's with everyone that you meet, get them to understand what a basic income is, have a chat with them about it, get their sense of what it is and how it would affect their life. So we're all having this cognitive shift of we need this, we can look at things differently. But also as organisations, as civil society, let's have this conversation on a slightly larger scale. Let's write policies for a basic income that we want to see and how it could be used. We can help you do that in a lot of detail. So please, contact me if you want to do that today. If you want to do it tomorrow, we can get it done, or in due course. And let's start presenting these alongside proposals that other people are presenting, alongside the Common Weal full spectrum of policies. But I think many organisations should be saying a basic income needs to be part of the future of Scotland as possible if we hope for it to happen.
And
thank you, Cleo.
And this is, I'm lucky. I don't get paid much, but I do get paid enough to think. So I get time to think. And it means that I have a chance to realise that sometimes we look through the wrong lens. We see the problem because we're looking through the wrong thing. And so I just wanted to encourage everyone. You never tell someone their question is wrong, but I want to encourage everyone to think about this idea of it's a new world by saying that's the joy of the word universal. We don't have to identify the carers. We don't have to identify the artists. We had the specific proposal on artists for another reason in the short term because the Scottish Government could do that. But in general, you don't have to. This is what I really want to encourage people to see. This is not yesterday with a universal basic income stuck on. It's got to be tomorrow. And once you say that, you free yourself from the assumption that you have to start means testing. Means testing disappears as part of our existence. And once you understand that, you start to go, right, okay, so the cost of administering this system is massively cheaper. And then we get to where we actually need to be with the conversation. This is not another version of the past.
Thank you. I was just typing into the session because there's already people kind of going, can we get momentum, and we'd love a follow-on session. And I think it's definitely something that the social enterprise sector is really behind, and I think we'll definitely be coming back to this. So I think the answer is yes, we will do some more sessions around this. And I guess, again, just finishing off, I know when we did our sessions the end of June, we were encouraged, a bit like Robin just said, how do we change some of the narratives? How do we change the lens that we're looking at things through? What are the accepted norms that are so drilled into us that we've come to accept that we actually almost need to cast away to relook at the kind of new world we want to imagine? So I think it is that kind of looking at the narratives that we have from a different perspective. And I think we'll be coming back to this. I'm really sorry we're rushing off, and I know there's still lots of questions, but I'm sure we'll end up inviting you back to do some more sessions. The questions have been great. People are already saying there's lots of really interesting stuff coming through, and I think particularly things around, like, I know community wealth building, as that programme moves forward, we'll be coming back to that again. And I don't think the debate on UBI is going away, so we'd love to have you back and we can pick this up again. And I'm sorry it's me that's rushing off today a little bit.
That's okay.
Apologies.
We'll no solve it today.
Yeah. It was on my list. I'm not gonna
But we'll try and solve it very soon, eh? Thank you both.
Thank you all.
Thanks so much. Really enjoyed it.
Yeah, brilliant. Thanks, guys.
Bye.
Bye-bye.